The morning of the hearing, I stopped for gas like it was any other weekday. The convenience store coffee tasted burnt. The lid didn't quite click on right, so I held it carefully with 2 fingers, the way you do when you're wearing a blazer you can't afford to stain. I remember the small things because the big things were already moving, whether I stared at them or not. By the time I parked outside the county courthouse, my hands were steady. Inside, the air had that familiar mix of old paper and lemon floor cleaner. The hallway lights were too bright. People talked in soft, anxious bursts, like they were trying not to wake something up. When the clerk called our matter, I walked into the courtroom and sat at the respondent's table without looking around for approval. My sister's attorney did that thing attorneys do when they want the room to lean toward them. He stood tall, smoothed his tie once, and spoke like he was delivering a public service. "Your Honor, we're demanding immediate control of the estate," he said. "The respondent is a thief. She didn't care for him. She held him hostage." He pointed straight at me. "She's a glorified nursemaid who manipulated a dying man. She can't be trusted with $5, let alone $8 million. My sister Brooke let out a sob that sounded rehearsed, expensive, and perfectly timed. The kind that makes strangers glance over like they're being asked to judge a scene they didn't witness. Across the aisle, my parents sat together in the second row. My father, Grant, was leaning forward with his hands clasped like he was in church. My mother, Elaine, kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue that never seemed to get wet. The judge looked at me. "Ms. Vale," he said, using my last name like he was testing the weight of it. "Do you object?" I didn't stand. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't do what they expected, which was to get emotional and start explaining. I just checked my watch, like I was waiting for a delivery. "Not yet," I said. My voice came out calm, almost casual. "I'm just waiting for the gatekeeper." That got a few heads to turn. My sister's attorney frowned like I'd broken a rule of the script. The heavy oak doors behind us opened. A man walked in who didn't match the rest of the room. He wasn't dressed for a family war. No glossy suit, no polished shoes, no confident smile meant for juries and judges. He wore a gray, off-the-rack suit that sat a little wrong at the shoulders. The briefcase in his hand looked like it had been dragged across airports and basements and a few decades of other people's problems. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at my parents craning their necks like they were trying to identify a threat. He walked straight to the clerk's desk, set down a thick sealed envelope, and then turned to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, voice dry and level, "I represent the Trust Department of Northridge National Bank. We are the successor trustee for the estate in question." It was a strange thing to watch, the way the entire courtroom changed without anyone saying another word. A second earlier, the room had been sticky with family emotion, accusation, and performance. Now it felt colder, cleaner, less human. The judge took the envelope without looking at anyone. He broke the seal with the corner of his letter opener and started reading. My sister's attorney popped up fast, chair legs scraping loud. "Objection. We haven't been notified of any corporate trustee. This is a probate matter." "Sit down, counsel," the judge said, not even glancing up. He kept reading. My mother's hands tightened in her lap. Her knuckles turned white, the way they used to when she was waiting to see what my father would do next. Brooke leaned toward me from her table. I saw her lips part, ready to speak, then close again. Her eyes were wet, but there was a sharper emotion underneath it. Panic, maybe, or the first hint that she might not be controlling the room anymore. The judge lifted his gaze. "Ms. Reed," he said, looking at Brooke, "are you aware that your grandfather's assets were placed into an irrevocable trust prior to his death?" Brooke blinked hard, like she hadn't heard him correctly. "What?" "No," she said. "He didn't know what he was doing. That's why we're here." The judge turned a page slowly. "The certification of trust states otherwise," he replied, calm as a metronome, "and it contains a provision regarding legal challenges." He cleared his throat and read aloud, carefully, like he wanted every word to land where it belonged. Article 9, Section C, No Contest Clause. Any beneficiary who seeks an adjudication in any proceeding attacking the validity of this trust or challenges the competency of the grantor shall immediately forfeit any and all interest in the trust estate, treating said beneficiary as if they had predeceased the grantor without issue. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed the same way. I looked at my father. His mouth hung open just slightly, like he'd been caught mid-order in a restaurant he thought he owned. My father could intimidate waiters. He could bully contractors. He could talk over people until they forgot what they came to say. But he was staring at the man in the gray suit with something close to dread. You can't bully a bank. You can't argue with a contract. Brooks' attorney had gone pale. His eyes flicked down toward the papers in the judge's hands, as if he might will them to change. "Your Honor," he said, voice suddenly thinner, "we withdraw the motion. We were acting on incomplete information." "The motion is filed," the judge said, and closed the folder. "Entered into the record." He looked toward the trustee. "The trust is active. The trustee is present. The assets are secure. The request for emergency control is denied." My mother made a sharp, involuntary sound and grabbed my father's forearm. Brooke turned fully toward me, eyes wide, and for the first time her face didn't look wounded. It looked cornered. "You knew," she hissed, loud enough that the bailiff shifted his weight. "You let us do this." I held her gaze without changing my expression. "I told you to wait," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'd spent years managing people with more money than my family ever had and less self-control than they pretended to have. You learn quickly that volume is what you use when you don't have leverage. The room started to buzz. Low voices, quick whispers, the sound of papers being gathered and chairs shifting. My parents' side of the table looked like a hive someone had kicked over. My father stared at the empty space in front of him like his brain was trying to find the place where the money had been a moment ago. My mother looked smaller than her coat, like it was swallowing her. Brooks' attorney leaned in close to my parents, whispering furiously, and I saw the way my father's jaw tightened, then loosened again, the way it did when he realized he couldn't force an outcome. For the first time in my life, they looked scared. I leaned back against the hard wooden chair and let myself watch. It was almost clinical, like watching a building crack before it falls. You don't hear the collapse first. You see the stress show up in small places. And as I watched my father wipe sweat from his upper lip with the edge of his hand, a memory came up so clearly it felt like a room I'd stepped back into. Not a courtroom, a kitchen. 15 years earlier. The air smelled like stale whiskey and something burnt on the stove. The overhead light hummed. I was 14, sitting at the table with my jaw swollen and aching, cotton packed in my mouth from emergency dental surgery. The procedure had cost $12,000. That same week, my parents' construction company filed for bankruptcy. They sat me at the table like it was an intervention. My mother cried in those sharp, jagged sobs that made you feel guilty for staying quiet. My father paced with a glass in his hand, liquid sloshing over his knuckles, anger filling every corner of the room. "We lost it all," he said, slamming his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware tray. "The house, the trucks, the contracts, gone." Then he pointed at my face, swollen and bruised. "Because of you." I remember the way his finger shook, not from emotion, but from the rage of someone who needed a target. "If we hadn't spent that capital on her teeth," he told my mother, speaking about me like I wasn't there, "we could have floated the loan. We could have survived the quarter." He took a drink, then said it again in a different way, like he was building a story brick by brick. "She drained us. She bled us dry." I believed him. I didn't even argue. I sat there with gauze in my mouth and took the weight of their failure onto my shoulders like it was a fact of nature, like gravity. That was the first time I learned what it felt like to be used as a container for someone else's shame. And sitting in the courtroom now, hearing the whispering, watching my family scramble. I could feel that old kitchen light buzzing at the edge of my mind. I looked down at my hands on the table. They were folded neatly. No shaking, no pleading. Then I waited. When I was 14, the swelling in my jaw lasted longer than the pain. The pain had a shape to it. It came in waves, like a dull tool scraping at the inside of my face. The swelling just sat there, stubborn, changing the way I spoke, changing the way people looked at me. At school, my friends asked questions I didn't have the energy to answer. At home, the swelling became proof of something my parents needed to believe. I didn't know that at the time. I only knew that every time I walked into the kitchen, my father's eyes would flick to my face, and his expression would harden as if I'd done something to him on purpose. After the bankruptcy, they repeated the story so often it became a family script. At Thanksgiving, my aunt would ask how the rebuild was going, and my mother would sigh and say, "Well, we were doing fine until, you know." Then she'd glance at me, soft and sorrowful, like I was a storm that happened to them. At Christmas, my father would bring it up after a drink or two. "We'd still be in the big place," he'd say, voice loud enough for cousins to hear, "if we hadn't had to dump 12 grand into emergency surgery." No one asked what kind of construction company collapses from a $12,000 expense. Nobody questioned why they didn't have reserves. Nobody asked where the rest of the money went. I didn't ask either. I was a kid. I was tired. And it felt easier to accept blame than to accept that the adults around me were reckless. 3 years later, my sister was born. Her name is Brooke in the story they tell now, but back then she was their miracle. The fresh start, the baby who showed up right when my father managed to talk a bank into taking a chance on him again. Suddenly there were dance lessons, tutors, new school uniforms that actually fit, summer camps with glossy brochures, and for a while it looked like it worked, like they'd been right and the universe had just needed to reset. But I noticed the math anyway. When Brooke needed something, it appeared. When I needed something, it was a negotiation. When I asked for a used laptop for school, my father told me I didn't understand budgeting. When Brooke wanted a brand new one for a dance video project, he said she had potential, and we don't want to limit her. At 16, I got a part-time job. My mother said it would build character. What it really did was build convenience. The first time my father asked me for money, it was small. He came into my room with a careful face, like he was about to deliver bad news about a distant relative. He sat on the edge of my bed without being invited and said, "We're just a little tight this month. It's temporary." He held out his hand like it was normal. I gave him the cash from my drawer. I remember the feeling of it leaving my fingers, the sudden emptiness where it had been. And I remember the relief in his eyes, not gratitude, but relief like I was a tool he'd found again. After that, it became a pattern. A utility bill that had to be paid right then or service would be shut off. A car repair that couldn't wait. A late fee that would snowball. Groceries because my mother forgot to move money into the right account. They never asked Brooke. They asked me, even when I was barely an adult. Even when I was living in a tiny apartment across town and juggling work and classes and exhaustion. There was always an explanation that made it sound reasonable. "Your dad has clients who pay late. We're waiting on a check. It's just for a week." And beneath that, a familiar undertone. "After all we've done for you. After what we lost because of you." That story became the leash they kept around my neck. I graduated, got hired, and moved to Baltimore for work. I told myself distance would fix the dynamic. It didn't. It just changed the method. The calls came at odd hours. My mother would start with normal questions. How was work? Had I been sleeping? Was I eating enough? Then her voice would shift, slight and practiced. "I hate to ask," she'd say, already asking. Then she'd hand the phone to my father, who always made it sound like I was part of a business plan. "Sweetheart, you're good with money," he'd say. "You know how this stuff works. If you can just cover this, we'll pay you back next month." Sometimes he actually did. Most of the time he didn't. And when he didn't, it became my responsibility to not bring it up, because bringing it up stressed your mother out. The truth is, I was paying a debt that wasn't real. I didn't see that clearly until years later. At the time, I was still trying to earn something I couldn't name. Approval, maybe, or a sense of safety, or just a clean slate where no one looked at me like the problem. When my grandfather got sick, the family orbit shifted again. His name was Howard, and he had the quiet kind of authority that didn't need applause. He was the only person in my family who could say no to my father and have it stick. As a kid, I used to watch my father around him like you watch a dog around a fence. My father would puff up and talk big around everyone else, but around Howard, he would recalibrate, smile, compliment, offer to help, do anything that kept him in good standing. Howard lived outside Richmond, in a house that smelled like cedar and old books. He kept his study neat, every file labeled, every drawer closed. He wasn't flashy. His wealth didn't look like jewelry. It looked like order. When he started declining, my parents treated it like a calendar event they could manage with appearances. They visited when it was convenient. They took pictures. They brought gifts that looked good in photos. Then they left, always with some excuse about traffic or commitments. Brooke did the same, but with more confidence. She had the ease of someone who'd never been asked to carry consequence. I visited differently. At first, it was weekends, then longer stretches. Then, eventually, I was there more often than I was at my own place. Not because I was trying to prove something, because he needed someone steady, and because, in a strange way, I felt calmer there than I did anywhere else. Caring for him wasn't sentimental. It was practical. He needed help managing medications, appointments, meals, the constant small tasks that pile up when someone's body stops cooperating. I took notes. I made schedules. I ordered supplies. I kept track of his oxygen levels the way you keep track of the weather, because it told you what kind of day you were about to have. Howard didn't talk much about feelings. He talked about specifics. What did the pulmonologist say? Did they change the dosage? Write it down. So I wrote everything down, not because I thought I'd need it in court, because when you're responsible for someone's care, your memory becomes a liability. Documentation becomes safety. It's strange, looking back, how that habit later became something else. A shield, a record, a way to prove reality. I didn't move into his house because I wanted control. I moved in because the nights were getting harder. He would wake up confused, pulling at his oxygen tubing. He'd panic when he couldn't catch his breath. Sometimes he'd reach for my wrist with surprising strength and whisper, "Stay here." So I stayed, and because I stayed, my family started telling a different story. They told friends I was hovering. They told relatives I was making myself important. They told Brooke's friends that I'd turned into some kind of gatekeeper. At first, I tried to correct them. I sent polite texts. I left voicemails explaining appointment times and visiting windows, the way a normal person does when there's misunderstanding. It didn't help. They didn't want clarity. They wanted access without responsibility. They wanted to walk in when it suited them, perform affection, and walk out before anything hard happened. And the harder Howard got to manage, the more they resented me for being there when they weren't. It was never said directly, but I felt it. They didn't like that he trusted me with details. They didn't like that I knew where the file cabinet key was. They didn't like that he asked me, not them, to call the bank or schedule the specialist. And they definitely didn't like that I stopped answering calls that came after midnight with slurred voices on the other end. I started putting boundaries in place, not dramatic ones, simple ones. No surprise visits late at night. No bringing alcohol into the house. No filming him when he was struggling to breathe. Those rules made sense to any reasonable person. To my family, they were an attack. The first time my father got angry about it, he called me from his car in a parking lot. I could hear wind and traffic through the phone. "You're acting like you own him," he said. I stayed quiet, listening, letting him fill the space. "You're making us look bad," he added, voice tightening. "People are talking." I didn't ask who. It didn't matter. "What time do you want to visit?" I asked, calm. He made a sound like I'd insulted him. I shouldn't have to schedule time to see my own father. "No," I said, still calm. "But he shouldn't have to get scared in his own house. So pick a time." There was a pause where I could almost hear him recalculating. Then he softened. "That's not what I meant," he said. "You know I love him. We're family." Family in his mouth was never about care. It was about access. That call ended the way most of our calls ended. No agreement. No apology. Just the sense that I'd stepped out of the role they assigned me, and they were taking notes. By the time Howard's health reached the stage where we had a hospital bed set up in the living room, my family had all but stopped helping. They still called, but it wasn't to ask what he needed. It was to ask what was happening with his estate planning. They didn't use those exact words at first. They danced around it. "Is everything in order? Do you know where his documents are? Has he updated anything recently?" If I answered vaguely, they pressed. If I answered clearly, they got offended. So I started answering the same way every time. "He's resting. His priority is comfort." That made them angry, because comfort wasn't the currency they were after, and under all of it, I could feel the shape of what was coming. Not because I was a genius, because I'd lived with them long enough to recognize patterns. When my father wants something, he doesn't ask once. He builds a narrative. He recruits witnesses. He creates urgency. He tries to make the other person look unstable. He'd done it to contractors. He'd done it to employees. He'd done it to me. I knew he'd do it again. So I tightened my routines. I saved every message. I logged appointments. I kept medication changes written down. I kept receipts. Not in a dramatic folder labeled evidence. Just in the same way Howard kept his house. In order. Then, 3 years before Howard died, he asked me to drive him into the city for a bank appointment. He didn't make a big announcement. He didn't call the family. He didn't even tell my parents he was going. He just said, "We're going to handle something." When I asked what it was, he looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses and said, "It's about making sure you don't get eaten alive." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, like I understood, even though I didn't fully. That day, I drove him downtown. I waited in the lobby while he went back with someone from the trust department. I watched the second hand of the clock above the entrance move steadily, the way it does when you're waiting for something that isn't yours to control. When he came out, he looked tired but settled. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. He just patted my arm once, firm and brief, and said, "All right, let's go home." And now, sitting in that courtroom years later, listening to my sister accuse me of theft and manipulation, I kept seeing that bank lobby. I kept seeing the quiet way Howard walked back through that door, the way he came out with his shoulders a little lighter. I looked down at my watch again, not because I needed the time, but because it reminded me that systems move on schedules, not emotions. Then I waited. After the judge denied their request, my family didn't regroup quietly. They didn't accept the loss and walk away to reassess. They did what they always did when a door closed. They tried to set the house on fire and call it self-defense. Brooke stood up so fast her chair legs squealed. "This isn't right," she said, voice unsteady but rising. "He wasn't in his right mind. He didn't even understand what he signed." Her attorney leaned into it immediately, like he'd been waiting for the pivot. "And if the court allows this corporate trustee to take control without reviewing the circumstances," he said, "we are looking at potential elder abuse and undue influence." It got quiet again, but not the stunned quiet from earlier. This was a different kind. The kind that turns heads, the kind that makes people in the gallery sit up straighter. Brooke pointed at me, fingers shaking. She isolated him. She changed the locks. She cut off phone access. For years we tried to see him and she treated him like a prisoner. My father stood, like he'd been waiting for his cue. It's true, Your Honor, Grant said, loud and sure. She kept us from him. Last Christmas Eve, we went there to bring him presents. We stood outside in the cold, begging to see him, and she locked us out. She wouldn't let a son see his dying father on Christmas. My mother made a small sound of agreement, right on time, tissue pressed to her mouth. From the gallery, I heard murmurs, a few sharp intakes of breath. It was a good story if you didn't know them. A cruel daughter, a shut door, a family kept away from a dying man. People love a story where the villain is simple. The judge's expression darkened. He looked down at his notes, then up at me. Ms. Vale, he said, these are serious allegations. Do you have a response? I kept my hands folded. My palms were damp, but my posture didn't change. I had learned the hard way that reacting too fast invites people to believe you are scrambling. Silence, used well, makes room for other people to talk themselves into a corner. I didn't answer yet. I looked toward the trustee in the gray suit. He was still standing near the clerk's desk, patient and almost indifferent, like a man waiting for his turn at the counter. The judge followed my glance. Counsel, the judge said to the trustee. Does the trustee have any evidence regarding these claims of isolation? Was the decedent prevented from communicating with his family? The trustee didn't rush. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it with a slow, practiced motion. He pulled out a heavy leather-bound book and placed it on the clerk's desk. It looked old, used, not treasured. The spine was cracked. The corners were worn smooth from handling. Then he placed a thick stack of paper beside it. We do, Your Honor, he said, and it does not show that Ms. Vale isolated the decedent. It shows that the petitioners abandoned him. Brooke stopped crying. It wasn't gradual. It was instant, like someone had cut a wire. My father's jaw shifted. He looked at the book as if it might start speaking on its own. The trustee nodded once, almost to himself. I am marking this as Exhibit B, he said, tapping the leather cover. The decedent's personal log. He referred to it as his rejection ledger. He tapped the stack of paper. And Exhibit C, itemized cellular records for the account registered to the decedent, covering the last 5 years. The words landed differently than accusations had. Accusations float. Records sit. The judge leaned forward slightly. Proceed, he said. The trustee opened the book to a page marked with a small tab. He didn't perform. He didn't look at my family. He just read, voice flat, as if he were reading account terms. Entry dated April 7th, he said. Petitioner Brooke Reed's birthday. He read my grandfather's handwriting aloud. Called Brooke to sing happy birthday, sent to voicemail, no call back. Then he picked up the phone record. Outgoing call to number ending in 4492, duration 4 seconds. He turned another page. Entry dated June 16th, Father's Day. He read, Grant said he would stop by after golf, never showed. Claire made steak. He lifted the phone record again. No incoming calls from Grant Vale on that date. One outgoing text from the decedent at 8:03 p.m. Are you coming? No reply. I didn't look at my father, but I could feel him shrinking in his chair. The heat of his presence changed, less confident, less expanded. My mother's mouth tightened into a thin line. She stared at the book like she could will it shut. Brooke's attorney tried to recover. Your Honor, this is private writing, a diary. It's not admissible. It is evidence of state of mind, the judge replied, still calm, and it is relevant to the allegations you just raised. Sit down. The trustee turned another tab. There were many. That was the part people don't anticipate. They imagine a single entry, a single emotional note. They don't imagine a system. My grandfather had made a system. The trustee kept reading, and every entry had the same shape, a promise, a missed visit, a call that went unanswered, a holiday reduced to silence, a text with no reply. The gallery stopped murmuring. People were listening now, not reacting. It felt like the room had shifted away from opinions and toward facts. Then the trustee turned to the last tab. Entry dated December 24th. he said. Christmas Eve. The room went still in a way that made my skin tighten across my shoulders. This was the night my father had just described with so much certainty. The porch, the cold, the locked door, the cruel daughter. The trustee read my grandfather's words. 11:45 p.m. Grant and Elaine arrived intoxicated, pounded on the door and shouted. It scared me. Heart rate went to 160. Claire kept the door locked because I begged her not to let them see me like this. He set the book down. Then he lifted a single page from the phone records. AT&T record shows a 911 call initiated by the decedent at 11:48 p.m., ended before connecting when the knocking stopped. I heard my mother inhale sharply, like she'd been slapped. My father's face changed color. Not anger yet. Something more exposed. He opened his mouth to speak, then didn't. The judge's gaze fixed on my father for a long beat, then moved back to the trustee. So the decedent was not isolated, the judge said. No, Your Honor, the trustee replied. He was protected. Brooks' attorney leaned toward his client, whispering. My father leaned toward my mother, whispering. They looked like people trying to assemble a new story out of scraps. Brooks stood up again, voice suddenly louder, less controlled. This is manipulated, she said. He was confused. He mixed up names. She put a pen in his hand. She made him write that. The judge's expression didn't change. Ms. Reed, he said, your attorney has already asserted your grandfather lacked capacity. This petition explicitly challenges competency. Brooke blinked, and I saw her mind catch up to the earlier reading. The no contest clause, the filed motion, the door they had opened. Her attorney swallowed hard. Your Honor, we request a recess. Denied, the judge said. You made the accusation. You opened the door. Now we walk through it. Then the judge turned back to me. Ms. Vale, he said, they are now alleging incompetence at the time the trust was executed. Do you have a response to the competency claim? I let the silence stretch just a moment longer. Not to be dramatic, to be precise. To let the room settle into the fact that this was no longer about who could cry harder. This was about what could be proven. I looked at the trustee, then at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, I said evenly. I do. I slid my hand toward my folder, feeling the edge of the paper inside, the familiar weight of preparation. Then I paused, just long enough to choose my next words carefully. I opened my folder without hurrying. Paper makes its own kind of sound in a courtroom. It's softer than people think, more like a dry whisper than a shuffle. The judge watched me, waiting for theatrics that never came. I didn't give him any. Yes, Your Honor, I said again, steady. I do have a response, and I'd like to be very clear about it. Brooks' attorney started to rise, then stopped when the judge lifted a hand. Let her speak, the judge said. I looked down at the top page in my folder, not because I needed to read it, but because I wanted the room to follow the same path I was going to follow. Facts first, process second, emotion last, if at all. The morning my grandfather updated the trust, I said, I didn't take him to the bank first. My father's eyes narrowed, like he didn't like the sound of that sentence. I scheduled 2 appointments before the bank, I continued. Not because I wanted control, because I knew exactly what would happen after he died. Someone would claim he wasn't competent. Someone would claim I forced him, and those claims would be used to try to seize assets. Brooks' face shifted, quick and sharp, like she wanted to interrupt. Her attorney touched her wrist to keep her seated. The judge leaned back slightly. What appointments? He asked. I nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and turned to the trustee. He didn't wait for drama either. He opened his own file and removed a document packet already clipped and labeled. Exhibit D, the trustee said, walking it to the clerk. Affidavit of capacity, signed by 2 forensic psychiatrists, completed 2 hours before execution of the trust amendment. The words forensic psychiatrists landed hard in the room. It wasn't a family opinion. It wasn't a neighbor's statement. It was the kind of credential that lives outside family arguments. Brooke's attorney tried again. "Objection," he said, voice tight. "She's creating a narrative. This is still a probate matter." The judge didn't look up. "Overruled," he said. "You challenged competency. You raised undue influence. Capacity evidence is directly relevant." The trustee continued, calm. "Both evaluators found the grantor oriented, lucid, and fully aware of his finances and family relationships," he said. "The evaluations were also video recorded. Copies were provided to the court with the exhibit list." A low movement passed through the gallery. Not chatter, more like a collective shifting of weight. People adjust when they realize they are about to learn something real. Brooke's mouth fell open. "Video recorded?" she said, voice thin. I kept my eyes on the judge. "Yes," I said simply. My father's hands moved on his knees like he wanted to stand again, but wasn't sure what the next line in his script should be. Brooke shook her head fast. "That doesn't prove anything," she said. "He was 89 on pain medication. He mixed up names. He was paranoid. That's what he was like. She just got fancy doctors to say what she wanted." The judge looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me again. "Who paid for these evaluations?" he asked. I answered honestly. "I didn't pay for them," I said. "I scheduled them." Brooke's expression snapped into something almost offended, like I'd admitted to a trick. "Those doctors cost thousands a day," she said. "She couldn't afford that." "I didn't need to afford it," I replied, still even. "My grandfather could, and he wanted it done." The trustee lifted 2 documents from his file and held them up briefly, then set them on the clerk's desk. "Canceled checks," he said. "Paid from the decedent's account. Signed by the decedent. Memo line references the capacity evaluations." My mother made a small sound, like she was trying to stop herself from speaking. Brooke's attorney went quiet. He was staring at the checks with a kind of professional dread. He knew what the judge was doing. The judge was building a record, not a mood. The judge spoke, voice lower now. "Ms. Reed," he said, "your petition states the grantor lacked capacity and that the respondent manipulated him. That is a serious accusation. You filed it as an emergency request. You asked this court to seize control of assets based on that allegation." Brooke swallowed. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently. I didn't need to hear it. I knew the words. "We should not have filed. We should have checked. We should shut up now." Brooke didn't listen. "He was confused," she said again, louder. "He didn't know what he was signing." The judge's eyes didn't change. "And yet," he said, "we have contemporaneous forensic evaluations finding competency, and we have payment authorization directly from the grantor. We also have phone records and a written log contradicting your claim of isolation." He paused. "Do you understand what that means?" Brooke blinked, still trying to push the story forward with force, like force could move a document. "It means she planned it," she said, desperate now. "She planned to steal from us." I inhaled quietly and let it out slow. This was the moment where people usually start talking about love and betrayal and sacrifices. That isn't how my mind works when I'm trying to keep someone safe. When things go sideways, I go to steps. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "may I explain my process plainly?" He nodded once. "Go ahead." I kept my voice level. "Step 1, I said. Make sure my grandfather's wishes are documented in a way that doesn't depend on anyone's opinion." I lifted a finger slightly, not for emphasis, more like I was keeping myself on track. "Step 2, I continued. Confirm capacity with independent professionals and record it so no one can rewrite history later." My father stared at me now. His eyes were narrowed, but there was something else there too. Calculation. He was trying to figure out where the exit was. "Step 3, I said. Use a trustee who is not family because family arguments don't stop when someone dies." Banks do not care about guilt trips. They care about instructions. The trustee stood still, hands folded. He didn't look proud. He looked like this was Tuesday. The judge nodded slightly, as if the steps made sense to him on a professional level. Brooks' attorney tried to interrupt again, but his voice didn't have strength behind it. Your Honor, even if there was capacity, there may still be undue influence, he said. This respondent lived with him, controlled access, managed medications. That creates a presumption. I didn't respond quickly. I let the judge answer because I could see where this was going. The judge turned a page in the filing. Counsel, he said, you didn't just raise undue influence. Your petition asserted incompetence. It requested emergency control. It suggested criminal misconduct. And now we have evidence suggesting those claims were filed without reasonable basis. Brooks' attorney went still. His face was damp around the temples. The judge looked back to the trustee. Do you have any further materials regarding the signing itself? He asked. The trustee nodded. We do, he said. The capacity evaluations include video. The trust execution includes bank verification procedures. There is also a recorded statement from the grantor explaining his intent. Brooks' breathing became audible, quick and shallow. My mother pressed her tissue to her mouth again, but her eyes weren't wet. They were scanning, watching, looking for someone to blame that wasn't themselves. The judge looked at Brooke. Ms. Reed, he said, your attorney sought emergency control of this estate. You accused the respondent of theft, coercion, and elder abuse. You challenged the validity of the trust. He set his pen down. This court does not treat those accusations casually. If you made them falsely, that is not just family conflict. That is potential perjury, and depending on intent, attempted fraud. The word perjury landed like a weight. My father's shoulders dropped slightly. It was subtle, but I saw it. He understood the difference between a family fight and a legal record. Brooks' attorney spoke fast, trying to pull the brakes. Your Honor, we were acting in good faith, he said. We were given incomplete information by our client and her family. We did not have notice of the trust structure or the trustee appointment. The judge's expression stayed flat. You filed an emergency petition, he said. You asked for immediate control. You demanded action without verifying the facts. He looked down at the documents again, then up at me. Ms. Vale, he said, I want to see the video capacity evaluation and the recorded statement of intent. I will also want a clear timeline of communications and visits in the months leading up to execution. I nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I can provide that. The trustee added, we can provide it today. Brooks' attorney looked like he was trying to keep his face from collapsing. The judge turned to him. Counsel, I'm going to continue this hearing for limited purposes, he said. I will review the recordings and the capacity affidavits. I will also set a sanctions hearing given the nature of the allegations and the apparent record before me. My mother made a sharp noise and leaned toward my father, whispering urgently. My father didn't whisper back. He just stared at the bench, eyes unfocused, like the room had become too bright. Brooke stood up again, this time without the performance tears. This time she looked angry in a way that felt more honest. You can't do that, she said. You can't just take it away. He was my grandfather. The judge didn't react to the emotion. I'm not taking anything away, he said. I'm applying the documents that govern the trust. He glanced at the no contest clause again, then back to her. And you should understand, he added, that your own filings may have consequences under that clause. Brooke's face went blank, like her mind was trying to rewrite the last 5 minutes. Her attorney pulled her down into her chair and whispered urgently again, more forcefully this time. I sat still, hands folded, eyes forward, because the truth was, the real shift had already happened. Not when the judge denied emergency control, not when the bank trustee arrived. The real shift happened when the courtroom stopped being a stage and became an archive, a place where paper mattered more than tears. The judge picked up his pen again. "We will take a short recess," he said. 15 minutes. He stood, and the bailiff called the room to order as the judge exited through the side door. Chairs scraped, people exhaled, lawyers leaned in, phones came out. I didn't move right away. I watched my father's hands. I watched my mother's mouth, still moving, still trying to manage his reaction like she managed everything. Then I looked down at my folder again, and at the small USB drive clipped inside the front cover. The videos were on that drive. My grandfather's voice was on those recordings, and for the first time that morning, I felt the faintest pressure in my chest. Not fear, just the weight of what it means to let a dead man speak in a room full of people who tried to erase him. Then I waited for the bailiff to call us back in. When the recess ended, the courtroom felt different. It wasn't louder. It was quieter, but not with tension. More like the air had been replaced with something heavier and more official. People had stopped treating it like a family argument and started treating it like a file that would outlive everyone in the room. The judge returned, sat down, and looked at the clerk. "Let's proceed," he said. The trustee stood first. He handed the clerk a small evidence pouch and then a copy of a chain of custody form. Everything had a label. Everything had a date and initials, the kind of details that don't care who cries. The clerk passed the pouch to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. The judge looked at me once. "Ms. Vale," he said, "this recording is from the capacity evaluations?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. The judge nodded and turned to the trustee. "Play it," he said. A monitor near the front of the courtroom flickered, then steadied. The sound came through the speakers with a soft hum at first, then a clear voice. My grandfather's voice. It didn't sound like the hospital bed. It didn't sound like oxygen and panic. It sounded like him on a normal day. A little older, a little slower, but steady. On the screen, he sat in a plain office chair, hands resting on his knees. The lighting was flat and bright, the kind you get in medical buildings. A forensic psychiatrist sat across from him, calm and professional, asking simple questions. My grandfather answered them without strain. Name, date, location. Then the questions shifted. "Do you understand what a trust is?" "Yes," he said. "Do you understand what assets you have and where they are held?" "Yes," he said, and then listed them in the way he always did, like he'd said it to himself before. House, accounts, insurance, deeds. He didn't hesitate. He didn't drift. "Do you understand who the beneficiaries are?" "Yes," he said. "Do you understand that this will take effect in the manner described after your death?" "Yes," he said again. The psychiatrist paused. "Has anyone pressured you to do this?" My grandfather looked straight at the camera. "No," he said. "This is me protecting what I built." The courtroom stayed still. Even Brooks' attorney stopped shifting in his chair. The only sound was the recording. The psychiatrist asked the next question in the same quiet voice. "Why did you choose a bank trustee rather than a family member?" My grandfather's eyes moved slightly, like he was thinking through the cleanest way to say it. "Because my family will fight," he said. "They always do." Brooks' head jerked up as if she'd been hit. She made a small sound, not a sob, more like disbelief trying to become anger. The psychiatrist continued. "Are you satisfied with the care you've received from Claire?" My grandfather nodded once. "She's the only one who shows up," he said. "She doesn't just visit, she handles things." The judge's gaze stayed on the screen. His expression didn't change, but the attention was absolute. The psychiatrist asked one more question. "Do you believe any family member is trying to influence you for financial gain?" My grandfather didn't answer quickly. On the screen, he inhaled, then exhaled. "I think they'll try after I'm gone," he said. "They're already circling. I can feel it." The psychiatrist didn't react. He just noted it down, then asked for clarification. "What makes you say that?" My grandfather's voice stayed calm. "They don't ask how I'm breathing," he said. "They ask what I'm doing with my papers." The recording continued for a few more minutes, then switched to the second evaluator. Different voice, same structure, same outcome. Oriented, lucid, clear understanding, no coercion. When the video ended, the courtroom didn't burst into sound. There was no dramatic gasp. There were just people absorbing what they'd heard. The judge sat back slightly and looked down at his notes. Then he looked up at Brooke. "Ms. Reed," he said, "this court now has independent medical evaluations, recorded from 2 forensic psychiatrists, completed hours before the trust was executed. Both found the grantor competent. Both found no evidence of undue influence, and the grantor himself articulated his intent clearly." Brooke's face tightened. Her eyes were still wet, but not with grief. It was that other thing I'd seen before, the sudden math of a life being recalculated. Her attorney stood again, careful now. "Your Honor," he said, "in light of this new information, we would like to withdraw the petition and resolve this privately." The judge didn't respond right away. He glanced down at the petition, then at the docket. "You filed an emergency petition," he said. "You accused the respondent of theft, coercion, and elder abuse. You challenged competency. You asked this court to seize assets based on those claims." He paused. "You don't get to light a match and then ask the court to pretend the smoke is private." Brooke's attorney swallowed. "My client was acting under emotional distress," he said. "We were misinformed." The judge's eyes moved to Brooke again. "Were you misinformed, Ms. Reed?" he asked. Brooke started to speak, then stopped. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She turned her head toward my parents, just for a second, like she wanted them to carry the answer. My father didn't move. My mother stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight, like she was trying to make her face look innocent through force of will. The judge picked up his pen. "This petition is dismissed," he said. "With prejudice." He looked toward the trustee. "The trust remains active," he continued. "The successor trustee is confirmed. The assets remain under trustee control, as the trust instrument directs." Then the judge looked back at Brooke's attorney. "And given the nature of the allegations and the evidence now before the court, I am setting a sanctions hearing," he said. "This court will review whether false statements were made under oath and whether this petition was filed without reasonable basis." He said it calmly, the way a doctor tells someone a procedure is necessary. No anger, no speech, just procedure. My father's face went a dull red. His hands curled into fists, then relaxed, like his body didn't know what to do without his usual tool set. Brooke made a sound that was half protest and half disbelief. "This isn't fair," she said, voice rising. The judge didn't look at her. "Fair is not the standard," he said. "The standard is the law and the documents your grandfather executed while competent." He turned to the clerk. "Next matter," he said. The bailiff called the room to stand. People rose, chairs scraping in a soft wave. The judge left through the side door without another glance at us. And just like that, the confrontation ended. Not with shouting, not with a final emotional line, with a docket entry. Brooke's attorney grabbed his briefcase like it could protect him. He leaned in close to her, whispering urgently. My parents stayed seated for a beat too long, like they couldn't accept the room had moved on without them. I gathered my folder slowly. The USB drive stayed clipped inside. The papers stayed in order. The trustee stepped toward me and spoke quietly, only for me to hear. "We will proceed exactly as the instrument directs," he said. "You did what you needed to do." I nodded once. "Thank you," I said. I didn't look at my family as I stood. I didn't need to. I could feel them watching anyway. In the hallway, the courthouse air was cooler. It smelled like old stone and something metallic from the vents. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my father call my name, sharp and clipped, like an order. Claire. I kept walking. He called again, louder. Claire, wait. I stopped, not because I had to, but because the hallway was narrow and I didn't want him close behind me. I turned halfway, just enough to face him without inviting him in. My father was coming fast, my mother close behind, Brooke trailing with her attorney. Their faces were tight and frantic, like they were trying to rebuild a plan while running. My father opened his mouth, and I could see the old instinct in his eyes, the assumption that I would fix what they broke. I let him start. Then I raised my hand slightly, palm down, not aggressive, just final. Not here, I said quietly. Not today. His mouth closed. He looked stunned, like he'd never heard that sentence from me before. I turned back toward the doors and walked out into the winter light, my folder tucked under my arm, my shoulders level. In the parking lot, the wind cut through my coat. I reached my car and set the folder on the passenger seat carefully, like it was fragile. Then I sat in the driver's seat, closed the door, and exhaled once. My phone stayed face down in the cup holder, and I waited to see who would make the next move. I didn't drive right away. I sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel, not gripping it, just holding the shape of the moment in place. The heater was blowing air that still smelled faintly like the last person who'd used the car before me, warm plastic and old peppermint. Outside, my family was crossing the parking lot toward me. I watched them through the windshield. My father moved like he always did when he thought speed could recreate control. My mother stayed half a step behind him, eyes darting. Brooke was slower, not because she was calmer, but because she was recalculating. Her attorney walked with his head down, already scrolling on his phone. My father knocked on the driver's side window. Hard. 2 sharp taps like punctuation. I didn't roll it down. I opened the door instead, just enough to step out and close it behind me, keeping the car between us like a boundary line. The wind caught the edge of my coat and tugged it. Claire, my father said, voice low but urgent, like we were about to negotiate a hostage release. We need to talk. My mother tried to soften it. Sweetheart, she said, we're all upset. Let's just calm down and work this out as a family. Brooke's eyes stayed fixed on the folder on my passenger seat, like she could see money through paper. Her attorney cleared his throat. Ms. Vale, he said, careful now. Perhaps we can discuss a settlement arrangement. There may be room for a mutually agreeable distribution without further litigation. I looked at him, then looked back at my father. My father didn't like that. He liked being the one spoken to. I'm her father, he said sharply. You don't talk over me. Then he turned back to me. This is a misunderstanding, he said. You've always been smart. You know what you're doing. But we can fix this before it gets worse. Fix this. The same words he used when he needed rent money, when he needed a utility bill paid, when he needed someone else to carry the consequences of his choices. I kept my voice even. There's nothing to fix, I said. His jaw flexed. Don't do that, he said. Don't play cold. You heard the judge. The bank is involved. That doesn't mean we can't handle it. We can appeal. We can challenge the trust in a different court. Brooke's attorney flinched at the word challenge. He shot my father a look that said, stop talking. I didn't raise my voice. You already challenged it, I said. On the record. My father's face tightened. We withdrew, he said. No, I replied. You tried. The judge didn't let you pretend it never happened. My mother stepped closer, tissue in hand, voice turning watery. Your grandfather would be heartbroken, she said. He loved all of us. He wouldn't want this. I nodded once, small and polite. He wrote what he wanted, I said, and he recorded it. Brooke moved forward suddenly, anger rising fast now that pleading was not working. You set us up, she said. You waited for us to make a mistake. I didn't deny it. I warned you, I said. You didn't listen. My father's expression shifted. The anger drained into something more desperate. We have debts, he said, quieter now, trying a different angle. You know we do. The house, the business loans, everything. If we lose access to those funds, we're finished. I looked at him steadily. You were finished years ago, I said. You just made sure I was the one keeping the lights on. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the sentence. My mother made a small sound of protest. That's not fair, she said. I kept my gaze on my father. You blamed me for your bankruptcy when I was 14, I said. You told people my dental surgery ruined you. Then you spent the next 15 years handing me your bills like I owed you for being alive. My father's face reddened again, but he didn't interrupt. He couldn't. This wasn't a debate, it was a record. Not in court, but in me. Brooke took a step toward my door as if she might reach past me. My tone didn't change, but it got sharper in its clarity. Do not touch my car, I said. She froze. Her hand stopped midair. Her eyes narrowed. My father tried one last command, the kind he used when I was younger and still believed he had authority that mattered. Open the trust, he said. Tell the bank you're willing to release a portion, just enough to stabilize things. We're family. You can do that. I shook my head once. I can't, I said, and I won't. He stared at me. You can, he insisted. You've always handled the paperwork. You always handle the paperwork. That was the sentence he couldn't hear himself say. He didn't know he'd admitted the whole dynamic. I let a beat pass. The trustee handles it now, I said. That was the point. Brooke's attorney stepped in finally, voice strained. Mr. Vale, we need to leave, he said. Now. My father ignored him. You're going to let a bank take everything? He demanded. You're going to let strangers decide what happens to our family? I looked at him calmly. They're not deciding, I said. They're executing instructions. My mother's face crumpled into something close to real panic. Then what do we do? She asked. I paused. Not for effect, just because the answer was simple, and simple answers can sound cruel when people are used to being rescued. You live with what you filed, I said. Brooke's eyes went wide again, then narrowed into hatred. You think you're better than us, she said. I didn't respond to that. It didn't matter. I opened my car door, got in, and closed it. I started the engine. The heater fan kicked up, steady and indifferent. Through the windshield, I watched them stand there for a second, the wind tugging at their coats, their faces not sure what expression to wear now that the audience was gone. Then I backed out and drove away. 3 days later, the trustee called me. His name was Mr. Sutter. He had the same dry voice as the courtroom, like he'd trained himself to remove emotion from important sentences. Ms. Vale, he said, the court has entered the dismissal with prejudice. The trust remains active. Our authority is confirmed. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and turned off the engine so I could hear him clearly. He continued. The court has also scheduled a sanctions hearing. The petitioners and counsel may be liable for fees and costs related to the emergency filing and the false allegations. I didn't react. I just listened. This is not a recommendation, he added. It is procedural. Given the filings, the no contest clause is triggered as written. I closed my eyes briefly, not from relief, just from the strange heaviness of hearing something you already knew become official. And my grandfather's intent statement? I asked. It is part of the record now, he said. The court acknowledged it. He paused, then said something that was almost gentle, by his standards. You did the right thing by documenting everything early. After we ended the call, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, looking at the rows of carts and the dull winter sky. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the absence of a task. For years, the task had been keeping the system afloat, paying a bill, making a call, fixing the next small crisis before it became a big one. Now the system had moved away from me. The next week brought more paperwork. Brooke was assessed attorney fees by the court. The number was high enough to force her into reality, not a dramatic ruin, just the slow, humiliating math of consequences. My father and mother were pulled into it too because they'd signed declarations. Their names were on statements that no longer matched the evidence. The trustee kept me updated in short, factual emails, dates, orders, deadlines. Then one more call came, 2.5 weeks after the hearing. "The transfers are complete," Mr. Sutter said. "Liquid assets have been moved into the trust distribution accounts. Deeds have been recorded according to the trust schedule. The final order has been entered." I was standing in my apartment kitchen when he said it. The sink was running. A plate was in my hand. I turned the water off and set the plate down carefully, like I didn't want sound in the room. "Thank you," I said. "We will continue to administer as directed," he replied. "If you receive contact from the petitioners, do not engage. Refer them to us." "I understand," I said. After the call, I stayed still for a long moment, hands resting on the counter, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator. The legal part was over. The documents had spoken. The system had done what it was designed to do. And for the first time in years, there was nothing left for me to manage. The first thing I did after the final transfer wasn't celebrate. I cleaned. I wiped down the counters until the surface felt smooth under my palm. I folded the dish towel into a neat square. I took out the trash even though it wasn't full. Simple tasks. Quiet order. The kind of order I never had growing up, when money and moods could change the temperature of a room in a second. That night, I made tea and didn't drink it right away. I just let the mug warm my hands while I stood at the kitchen window. The street outside was still. A car passed once, tires hissing over damp asphalt. Somewhere down the block, a porch light flicked on. Ordinary life, continuing. I let myself watch it without feeling like I needed to chase it. When I finally sat down, I opened the folder I'd brought home and did what I always do when something ends. I filed it. Not as a trophy, not as proof I'd won anything, just as a record. Court order in the front, trustee confirmation behind it, copies of the exhibits, the capacity affidavits, a printed summary from the trustee with dates and steps, written in the kind of language that doesn't care who deserves what, only what was executed and when. I added one final page for myself, a single line at the top, no more emergency fixes. I didn't write it like a promise. I wrote it like a policy. Then I opened my contacts. I didn't do it in anger. I didn't do it fast. I did it the way you remove things from a shelf when you're done using them. My father's name first. Delete. My mother's name next. Delete. Brooke's number last. Delete. No blocking, no dramatic final message. Just a clean removal. After that, the quiet felt different. Not empty, just unoccupied. A few days later, I drove out to my grandfather's house. The trustee had already arranged the lock change, the insurance transfers, the utilities. Everything was handled through checklists and confirmations. It felt strange to see a life reduced to tasks, but it also felt right. My grandfather trusted systems because systems don't pretend. Inside, the house smelled the same as always. Cedar, old paper, a hint of furniture polish. I walked into his study and stood there for a while without touching anything. The desk was clean. The lampshade was slightly tilted, the way he always left it. The chair had the faint impression of use, like someone might sit down any minute and open a book. On the corner of the desk sat the leather-bound journal, the one the trustee carried into court. I picked it up carefully and set it in front of me. I didn't flip to the pages about my family. I didn't reread the entries that proved what happened. That part was done. Instead, I turned to the last page. His handwriting was thinner there, more deliberate. He'd written fewer words, but each one felt chosen. He didn't write about revenge. He didn't write about winning. He wrote about clarity. He wrote, in his way, that he'd seen who showed up and who only came around when there was something to take. He wrote that he was tired of being treated like an account. He wrote that he wanted me to be free of the role they put me in. I closed the book and sat for a moment with my hands resting on the cover. Then I stood, walked to the window, and opened it a few inches. Cold air came in, clean and sharp. It moved the curtain slightly. I stayed there until my shoulders dropped on their own. Later, back in my apartment, I noticed how my body started changing when my phone buzzed, not with a call from them. Those had stopped. But my nervous system didn't know that yet. It still waited for demands, for guilt, for emergencies. So I gave myself new signals. I set my phone on the shelf by the door when I came in. Face down, silent. I turned on a small lamp in the corner at night instead of using the overhead light. Softer, less harsh. I made breakfast the same way each morning. Eggs, toast, coffee, no rushing. It sounds small, but small routines are how you teach yourself that life can be steady. A week after the hearing, I got an email forwarded by the trustee. It wasn't from my family. It was from someone else in my grandfather's orbit, an old neighbor who'd known him for years. She wrote politely, carefully, the way people do when they're not sure what they're allowed to say. She told me she'd seen my parents in the area once, asking questions, trying to find out who had access to the house now. She said she didn't answer them. She said she didn't like the way they talked about my grandfather, like he was a thing that had been taken from them. At the bottom, she added a line that stayed with me. If you ever need someone to be a witness to reality, call me. I stared at that sentence for a while, because it reminded me that this wasn't rare. Families do this all the time. Not the exact same people, not the exact same numbers, but the pattern is familiar. Someone gets sick. Someone shows up. Someone else feels entitled. Then the story gets rewritten to punish the person who did the work. 2 days later, another message came, this time from a woman I used to work with. We weren't close, but we'd stayed loosely connected. She'd heard, through the same quiet channels people use, that I'd handled a trust situation. She didn't ask for details. She just asked one question. My uncle moved my grandmother into his house and now no one can reach her. He says it's for her safety. What do I do? I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down, not because I didn't care, because I knew if I answered in a rush, I'd answer with old instincts, the ones that say, fix everything immediately. I didn't live like that anymore. I made tea first. I sat down. And I wrote back the way my grandfather taught me to think. Start with records. Start with dates. Start with systems. Then move. That's the thing people don't tell you about moments like mine. The court part ends, but the skill stays. The calm stays. The ability to watch a story and decide whether it's true stays. And sometimes, someone else needs that. If you've been listening this far, thank you for spending this time with me. If you want more calm, real-life stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel reach the people who need it. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now.